this is my progressive to watch in 2017. So there are a lot of progressives to watch in 2017. Keith Ellison is probably going to be the DNC chair, fingers crossed. Nina Turner is this vocal, amazing voice. I could not believe I got the opportunity to meet with her. Some in the establishment think Elizabeth Warren is the progressive to watch. I don't know about that. But there are so many future progressives that are going to give a voice to everybody that has been screaming and saying, DNC, wake up, pay attention. And I think that voice, honestly, if I was to put money on it now, the most important progressive voice is going to be Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard is perhaps the most courageous politician of 2016, and I'm including Bernie Sanders in that, because, yes, Bernie Sanders is as courageous as you can get, but what Tulsi Gabbard did when she stood up to the Democratic establishment, when she did not have a presidential campaign backing her, when she didn't have, at this point, a lot of momentum, Bernie had a lot of momentum going into 2016. Tulsi Gabbard had a lot to lose. She was a fairly no-name congresswoman who had a leadership position in the DNC, and she risked that all, and she spurned all of that for the courage of her convictions. She stood up to those Democratic donors. She stood up to the establishment. And she said, what you're doing is wrong. You are rigging the system. And there are so many progressives and Democrats that didn't do it. Elizabeth Warren included. She was not on the DNC leadership, but she was an important Democratic voice that also had a lot to lose. And she chose not to risk that loss. So Tulsi Gabbard is courageous in her DNC and her Democratic leadership, and also on the battlefield. She is an Iraq war veteran. That gives her the credibility that conservatives can't take away from her. Yeah, she's a veteran, and she kicks butt. She's courageous in more ways than one. When she resigned and she talked on Meet the Press, she said, as a veteran, as a soldier, I've seen firsthand the true cost of war. As we look at our choices as to who our next commander-in-chief will be, is to recognize the necessity to have a commander-in-chief who has foresight, who exercises good judgment, who looks beyond the consequences, and who looks at the consequences of the actions that they are willing to take before they take those actions. So we don't continue to find ourselves in these failures that have resulted in chaos in the Middle East and so much loss of life, she said, after she resigned as vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. What also makes her stand out as a progressive is that Tulsi Gabbard is very non-interventionist. But listen to her progressive stances. She's against mandatory minimum sentencing from the beginning. She was against the Keystone XL pipeline from the beginning. Against DAPL from the beginning. One of the only, I think, 3 congressmen women to visit North Dakota and Standing Rock. She wants federal caps on greenhouse gas emissions and federal funding for solar and wind energy. And she was against the TPP from the beginning. She was in the Hawaiian National Guard in 2002, served in Iraq in 2004, and she's just, I like that she's taking a stance on a less muscular and less in-your-face, violent, murderous United States foreign policy. So let me also read to you, to close, 2 separate things that just really sell me on Tulsi Gabbard and her role in the future. This was an email that she got in 2016, again, going back to her courage, from, that was forwarded to John Podesta, of course, from a big Hollywood agent called Darnell Strom, who's basically a bundler for the Democrats, and Michael Keeves, who is a Democratic fundraiser. The big money players. You know, the people that you actually are supposed to respond to. They said to her, we were very disappointed to hear that you would resign your position with the DNC so you could endorse Bernie Sanders, a man who has never been a Democrat before. When we met over dinner a couple of years ago, I was so impressed by your intellect, your passion, and your commitment to getting things done on behalf of the American people. for you to endorse a man who has spent almost 40 years in public office with very few accomplishments. By the way, he was known as the Amendment King because he passed all these amendments and helped out Americans. Never mind that. Doesn't fall in line with what we previously thought of you. Hillary Clinton will be our party's nominee, and you standing on ceremony to support the sinking Bernie Sanders ship is disrespectful to Hillary Clinton. A woman who has spent the vast majority of her life in public service and working on behalf of women, families, and the underserved. And then they said, yeah, we're pulling your funding. So, that's how this game works. God, don't they look stupid now? Don't they look idiotic? She will be the nominee. She will. And this was in February of 2016, long from over. That's how insistent they were. Honestly, they would have rather had this ideologue, narcissist, who is now in office, Donald Trump, over having an actual progressive in, because then all of their power would be gone. They're disgusting people, honestly. And she stood up to all of that. She is in her 30s, she is young, and she put her career on the line. And all of her funding got pulled. And that's why she's going to succeed, because she stood up to big money and she's still standing. And that's why she's the progressive, for me, of 2017. Lastly, what also seals the deal for how progressive she is to me is how the Washington Post referred to her in their article about who the progressive movement is going to be led by. So they threw out a bunch of names, including Nina Turner, which I like, but listen to how they frame this, and this is how you know. When the Washington Post is giving speculative stories and stuff that has editorial elements involved, and then you can see the establishment seeping out, and then you know their real stance on issues. So this is the contempt with which they treat Tulsi Gabbard. If Harris, they're talking about Kamala Harris of California, if Harris is a peacemaker in the Democratic Party, then Representative Tulsi Gabbard is on the opposite end of the spectrum. The first American Samoan, the first Hindu, this is what they focus on, and one of 2 female combat veterans elected to Congress in 2013 was a rising star in the Democratic Party who quickly joined party leadership. But in February, she basically defected by stepping down from her post as a vice chair of the Democratic National Committee, in parentheses, a job that required her to be neutral in the primary, as if the DNC was neutral, you nincompoops. That is the worst burn I've ever done. I apologize to everyone who had to hear that. To endorse Sanders. Some in the Democratic establishment were frankly happy to see her go. She engaged in a nasty back and forth with the DNC this fall over presidential debates and was clearly at odds with party leadership. Oh, she's so hard to work with, Washington Post. Progressive seems equally happy to receive Gabbard, despite some of her hawkish tendencies. Hide your contempt a little bit better, Washington Post. Blech. Vomit. Gross. You're done. It's tremendously horrible. You're losing. You're not winning with this. Washington Post. Okay. So, again, that's really what I want to say. She is the progressive for me to watch in 2017. And, look, guys, there's a lot of progressives coming up, and I think it's our perhaps the progressive renaissance. I hope for that.